During the 1980s, China was in the market for new fighter aircraft. There were several domestic programs underway, but they were also interested in looking for foreign-built jets to help fill out their needs. In 1988, the Soviet Union had first offered China the MiG-29 for export, but the Chinese were aware of their own efforts to develop a new lightweight fighter, and instead they focused on buying the Sukhoi Su-27. In December of 1990, an agreement was reached, and China became the first operator of the Su-27 outside of the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union collapsed a year later, the future of the deal was uncertain, but China was able to keep it alive since the newly formed Russian Federation badly needed foreign orders in order to keep its aviation industry going. China not only received a batch of Su-27 jets, but was able to negotiate domestic production of the plane as the J-11. Deliveries of Russian-built Su-27s continued into the 2000s, with China producing a batch locally built from parts kits that were sent by Russia. In 2004, there was some significant drama with the Russians accusing China of violating their existing production agreements by working on the J-11B, which was going to be using Chinese-sourced systems instead of being dependent on parts supplied by Russia. There have been ongoing controversies surrounding this, with reports and counter-reports that China's domestic J-11 variants both are and are not properly licensed under agreements with Russia and Sukhoi. But whatever the truth is, the fact remains that China has gone on to develop the basic airframe into several advanced versions, including air superiority fighters, a carrier-capable fleet defense fighter for service aboard China's somewhat new fleet of aircraft carriers, as well as multi-role versions. The Chinese Air Force and Navy currently have at least 250 J-11 aircraft in service between them across several different generational upgrade variants. The first of which was the J-11A, which replaced most of the 1980s avionics with more modern systems. The B model came next, almost fully replacing all of the electronics and systems with domestically produced Chinese versions, as well as upgrading the weapons, adding multi-role capability, and later changing out the engines for a domestically produced option. What we get in War Thunder is the J-11B, a jet fighter in rank 8 of the Chinese tech tree at battle rating 13.7 for air and 12.7 for ground. This jet gets a full ballistics computer, including the EEGS, a fully modern radar warning receiver, with a missile approach warning system, but I recommend turning off the automatic countermeasures as you'll run out really fast. The radar is the Type 1493 and includes an infrared search and track unit. It's got almost all of the top-tier radar modes, 8 data link channels, as well as helmet-mounted targeting. I discuss some radar caveats a bit later. For loadouts, this jet gets a huge selection of air-to-air missiles and air-to-ground weapons, ranging from dumb bombs to anti-tank missiles. Your up-close dogfight missile is the PL-8B. This is an all-aspect infrared missile with infrared counter-countermeasures, 40 Gs of pull, and a fairly large warhead for such a small weapon. Unlike most other dogfight missiles, it uses a quick burn booster with a sustainer, and it doesn't track quite as well as the 9 mic or the R-73, but it's still a perfectly capable weapon, and it'll get you lots of kills up close. Your radar missile is the PL-12. This is an active radar weapon with a fairly large warhead. On paper, this is one of the best missiles in the game, with a slightly better rocket motor than the AMRAAM, and a shorter proximity fuse that combines with its huge warhead to inflict massive damage on a successful hit. However, it doesn't loft quite as well, so maximum range yeet shots are going to tend to be very slightly less accurate and effective. For air-to-ground weapons, it's a big list, but there are a couple of standouts. The GB-250 guided bomb can use either satellite or laser guidance, and it's got an inertial tracker to keep it going through a short loss in a laser lock. This is a very effective guided bomb with pretty high accuracy. The real monster for ground attack with the J-11B is the KH-29TE. This is a TV-guided anti-tank missile with long range and a huge warhead. This thing is going to one-shot anything it hits, and it even does significant splash damage on a near miss, and sometimes you'll get assists from this thing that you weren't even intending for. In terms of its flight performance, the news with the J-11B is mostly good. This jet has different engines than the other flankers. It's got the Chinese WS-10A instead of the AL-31F. And while it's still a big, chonky aircraft, it doesn't have quite as much weight creep as some of the other flankers. Along with the Su-27SM, it's got the best rate of climb out of all of the flankers, and it's the fastest up at high altitude. In fact, above 10,000 meters, this is one of the fastest jets in the game. But in War Thunder's current game modes, that rarely ever actually matters. Now, its turn performance is still pretty good for such a large jet, but it's got the usual flanker family caveat of difficult energy retention in tight turns, and I want to take a moment to explicitly mention the AOA limiter toggle. Like some of the other jets at top tier, you can turn off the AOA limiter, but I generally advise being really careful with this, even in emergencies, as this jet tends to flop around a little bit worse than some of the others, and it may take you longer to recover into controlled flight than you're expecting. It works, and you can use it, but just be careful, maybe a little bit more careful than usual. When you fly this jet out into air battles, you're going to have a similar overall experience if you've flown the J-11A before it in the tech tree. Just better. You still have an odd mix of 6 and 4 for your radar and infrared missiles for an overall load of 10. The big caveats with the weapons are that your dogfight missiles don't have thrust vectoring like the R-73E, and your PL-12 is generally an upgrade for BVR shots. The radar is also better, and it tends to track better at medium and long ranges, which combines with the PL-12 to make the J-11B a bit better at long-range combat than the earlier J-11s. Speaking of the radar set, its performance is definitely an upgrade over earlier J-11s, but it suffers from a bit of an issue that's started to bother me about a lot of the top-tier jets lately. Mode creep. You get a large quantity of radar modes, but you have no way to cycle to specific modes, and if you want to change just between two of them back and forth, you have to cycle through all of the others first, which can be a bit of a distraction and a chore in the insane fast-paced sensory overload of the current air battles meta at the top tier. Now, this is a multi-role fighter, and it gets some pretty effective weapons for ground attack. In air battles, I generally suggest sticking to air combat at the top tier after you've spaded the jet, but ground strikes can be a great way to finish those upgrades while you're still working on them. As for close air support, really this is one of the most effective jets that China can use as of mid-2025. It can take a targeting pod as well as a reasonable quantity of ordnance, and it's got a significantly better radar warning receiver than previous Chinese flankers. The KH-29TE is my preferred weapon for close air support, but the others are still effective if they fit your personal playstyle better. Plus, with its great air-to-air missiles, you can use the J-11B to do air cover or legit multi-role sorties. Visually, it's a flanker. You get a few paint jobs for it that are all honestly somewhat kind of bland looking, but I like the solid white one, and overall it's still a pretty good looking jet. The landing performance of the J-11B is, again, basically the same as other versions of the flanker. You can drop the gear at about 700 kilometers an hour and the landing flaps at about 600 with no other special caveats beyond remembering that it's a big heavy jet. Now, the cockpit is very well done. Great visibility, huge MFDs, a useful heads-up display, and very clear instrumentation. I had a really fun time with this VR, and it's pretty easy to fly. To close out on the J-11B, this jet gets powerful air-to-air missiles, good air-to-ground weapon options, it's got a decent radar set, and a fully modern radar warning receiver. However, it's still a heavy jet, and it runs out of countermeasure charges faster than some of the competition. The final verdict on the J-11B is that this is an upgrade over the basic J-11 in essentially every possible way. It's worth the grind, and it can be a strong performer for China in basically any game mode. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, the algorithm wants you to check this next one out.